Iran was never supposed to survive. Not after the revolution, not after the sanctions, and certainly not after one of the deadliest wars of the 20th century. For more than 40 years, governments around the world have tried to isolate Iran. Its economy was targeted. Its banks were cut off. Its oil exports were sanctioned. Many believed it was only a matter of time before the system collapsed. But that never happened. Instead, Iran adapted. It built secret trade networks. It created parallel financial systems. It developed weapons designed to challenge far richer rivals. And today, despite decades of pressure, the Islamic Republic remains standing. So how did a country that was supposed to fail become one of the most resilient states on earth? This is the mystery of Iran, and this is how a sanctioned nation refused to collapse. To understand modern Iran's extraordinary resilience, we must roll back the clock to the pivotal era before 1979. During the 1960s and 1970s, Iran was not an adversary of the West. On the contrary, it stood as Washington's #1 ally in the Middle East. Under the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Persian nation grew immensely wealthy from its massive oil reserves. This sudden wealth fueled rapid modernization, quickly transforming the country's infrastructure, urban spaces, and cultural landscape to align closer with Western societies. But beneath the glittering surface, Iran was becoming deeply unstable. The blistering pace of these reforms triggered fierce resistance from traditional religious classes, while a widening gap between the rich and the poor alienated millions of ordinary citizens. By 1978, this simmering undercurrent of resentment exploded into massive protests across the country. Every opposition faction, despite their vastly different ideologies, united under a single, charismatic spiritual leader living in exile, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In January 1979, the pressure from the streets became unbearable, forcing the Shah to flee the country and bringing an end to a 2,500-year-old monarchical tradition. Weeks later, millions filled the streets of Tehran to welcome Ayatollah Khomeini home. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born, founded on a radical new political theological doctrine, Vilayat-e-Faqih, or the guardianship of the Islamic jurist. The state was no longer a Western proxy. It had suddenly mutated into a revolutionary, anti-imperialist, theological fortress. Geopolitical shockwaves erupted immediately. The definitive break in U.S.-Iran relations reached a tipping point on November 4th, 1979, when radical Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 American diplomats hostage for 444 days. This surge was fueled by the deep-seated fear that Washington was actively plotting a counter-coup to restore the Shah, mirroring the infamous CIA-backed coup of 1953. In response, U.S. President Jimmy Carter declared a national emergency, froze billions of dollars in Iranian assets, and imposed the first comprehensive trade embargo. Overnight, Iran was severed from its primary source of military spare parts, economic investment, and Western diplomatic backing. The revolution had succeeded, but Iran entered a completely different path, standing entirely alone against the isolation of the international community. Yet, the revolution was merely the opening salvo. The ultimate test of national survival arrived just 1 year later. In September 1980, perceiving Iran to be fatally weakened by sanctions, a purged post-revolutionary military officer corps, and internal political instability, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein saw a golden opportunity. Covertly backed by both the United States and the Soviet Union, and fueled by massive financial funding from wealthy Arab monarchies in the Gulf, Iraq launched a total military invasion across Iran's southwestern border. Saddam Hussein was utterly convinced that the young revolutionary government in Tehran would collapse within weeks. He severely miscalculated. Instead of collapsing, Iran became more united than ever. Millions who disagreed about politics suddenly agreed on one thing: the country had to survive. The existential threat of this invasion acted as an intense national adhesive. The prophetic appeals from the Islamic government successfully rallied the population around a banner of sacred national defense. Hundreds of thousands of young men from the volunteer-based militia rushed to the front lines, charging into Iraqi minefields with absolute religious conviction in their holy sacrifice. The conflict quickly bogged down into a brutal, industrialized war of attrition that lasted for 8 grueling years, mirroring the horrors of World War I. The battle raged far beyond the muddy trenches of the front lines, expanding into the War of the Cities, where long-range missiles regularly rained down on both capitals, and the Tanker War, which threatened vital commercial shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf. Facing a total arms embargo with 0 international suppliers, Iran was forced to rely strictly on itself. When its American-made fighter jets ran out of components, Iranian engineers reverse-engineered systems to manufacture spare parts from scratch. When foreign nations refused to sell basic artillery shells to Tehran, they built underground defense industrial plants to manufacture their own. When the war finally ended with a UN-brokered ceasefire in 1988, the geographical boundaries of both countries remained completely unchanged. However, structurally and strategically, everything had transformed. The war had cost Iran an estimated 500,000 lives and hundreds of billions of dollars in economic damage. But it forged the mindset of modern Iran. Iran emerged from the conflict with a profound, systemic distrust of the international community. They learned that they could rely on absolutely no one for their own security. This era gave birth to the doctrine of jihadi kadkafe, or self-sufficiency jihad. Tehran realized that to survive in a permanently hostile world, it had to manufacture its own weapons, grow its own food, and build an economy capable of operating completely independent of the Western world. The hardships of that 8-year war became the foundational blueprint for modern Iranian survival. Yet even self-sufficiency would not be enough, because the greatest challenge facing Iran was still ahead, an economic siege that would last for decades. As Iran set out to rebuild its shattered infrastructure during the 1990s and 2000s, economic pressure from the West did not fade away. It evolved into hyper-sophisticated forms. The discovery of Iran's clandestine uranium enrichment facilities at Natanz and Iraq in 2002 triggered an unprecedented wave of international sanctions. This culminated in 2012 when the U.S. and the European Union disconnected all Iranian banks from SWIFT, the global financial messaging system. By 2018, Washington launched its maximum pressure campaign, aiming to reduce Iranian oil exports to an absolute zero by deploying heavy secondary sanctions against any nation or company daring to trade with Tehran. Yet, instead of collapsing under this tightening noose, Iran became a master at constructing and operating an adaptive economy that runs entirely underground and in shadows. The first pillar of Iran's survival is what analysts often call the ghost fleet. Hundreds of oil tankers linked to front companies move Iranian crude across the world while avoiding traditional oversight. In simple terms, Iranian oil disappears at sea and reappears under a different identity. By the time it reaches a refinery, tracing its true origin becomes far more difficult. It is sold directly to independent, privately owned refineries in China known as teapots. These refineries bypass the US dollar entirely and hold no assets in New York, making Washington's sanctions completely toothless. The second pillar is the shadow financial network. Barred from utilizing international banks, Iran reroutes its financial flows through thousands of front companies established in Dubai, Hong Kong, and Turkey. When Chinese refineries purchase Iranian oil, the payments are routed into the local bank accounts of a front company in Hong Kong or Singapore. That company then uses those funds to directly purchase consumer goods, industrial components, or microchips that Iran desperately lacks, shipping them back to Tehran under falsified customs manifests. While the shadow network manages international trade, a massive structural shift occurred within domestic borders under the doctrine of the resistance economy. The severe restriction of foreign imports acted as a brutal, unintentional form of hyperprotectionism. When Western brands pulled out of the market, local Iranian conglomerates and entrepreneurs immediately stepped up to engineer domestic substitutes. Iran developed its own completely internal digital ecosystem separate from Western platforms. They built Shitab, a sophisticated national electronic banking card system that processes all retail transactions independent of Visa or MasterCard networks. E-commerce needs are met by Digicala, which dominates the domestic marketplace much like Amazon does globally. Urban transportation relies heavily on Snap, a highly efficient domestic ride-hailing application running on a completely localized network. Furthermore, over time, Iran built far more than an oil economy. It built an industrial economy, driven by a highly educated, technical workforce. The core of this domestic industrial empire is heavily controlled by the state and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, RGC, through its massive engineering wing, Khatam al-Anbiya. While this system is plagued by internal corruption and high inflation, it possesses one undeniable strength. It operates via a closed supply chain completely within Iranian borders, making it immune to external blockades. Iran did not defeat the sanctions. It adapted to them. Over time, sanctions stopped being an emergency and became part of everyday life. And that adaptation may be Iran's greatest strategic advantage. But economic survival alone is not enough. A country can still be invaded. It can still be bombed. It can still be forced into submission. Iran understood this better than most, well aware that it cannot match the conventional defense spending of the United States or its wealthy regional rivals. Iran intentionally rejected traditional military structures. Instead, it pioneered a highly effective strategy of asymmetric deterrence, focusing heavily on two core pillars: precision ballistic/cruise missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. Today, Iran commands the largest and most diverse missile arsenal in the Middle East, capable of striking regional strategic targets with high precision. Then Iran discovered something important. It didn't need better weapons. It needed cheaper ones. This realization led to the development of the Shahid 136 drone. These are low-cost, delta-wing loitering munitions built using commercial, off-the-shelf electronics and simple two-stroke gasoline engines similar to lawnmowers. Though slow, these weapons are manufactured by the thousands and deployed in massive swarms designed to completely overwhelm sophisticated, ultra-expensive Western air defense networks. This creates a devastating economic asymmetry. An adversary is forced to fire a $3 million Patriot interceptor missile just to down a drone that cost Iran less than $20,000 to build. This technology proved so potent that it transformed Iran into a strategic weapons exporter, supplying thousands of UAVs to Russia during the conflict in Ukraine, directly shifting the nature of modern warfare. But drones alone cannot secure a nation. Iran needed something else, a way to keep potential conflicts far from its own borders. The second pillar of Iran's security architecture is its regional proxy network, widely known as the Axis of Resistance. Behind much of the strategy stood one man, General Qasem Soleimani, the legendary commander of the IRGC Quds Force. The objective of this doctrine is clear: push the theater of war far away from Iran's actual borders, establishing a ring of external defense to deter foreign attacks. This network stretches across the most critical geopolitical fault lines of the Middle East. In Lebanon, Iran nurtured and funded Hezbollah into the world's most heavily armed non-state military force, holding over 150,000 rockets aimed directly at Israel, acting as a powerful deterrent against any strikes on mainland Iran. In Yemen, Iran backed the Houthi movement, transforming a localized tribal insurgency into a potent regional force capable of using anti-ship ballistic missiles to block international shipping lanes through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, directly challenging Western naval dominance in the Red Sea. In Iraq and Syria, capitalizing on the power vacuums left by prolonged conflicts, Iran established powerful Shia militias with decisive political sway, while successfully protecting the Syrian government, securing a continuous land corridor running all the way from Tehran to the Mediterranean coast. This proxy network grants Iran an invaluable strategic asset: plausible deniability and the leverage to escalate conflicts at will. It guarantees a stark reality. Any foreign military action designed to destroy the regime in Tehran will instantly trigger an all-out regional war, engulfing the entire Middle East. It is this incredibly high cost that has consistently forced superpowers to hesitate. After nearly half a century of economic sieges, diplomatic isolation, and constant military threats, the Islamic Republic of Iran remains standing. Its survival is not an accident of history, nor is it driven solely by oil wealth. It is the result of a deliberate, deeply entrenched survival strategy built upon four foundational pillars: a strategic geography controlling vital global energy choke points, vast resource reserves supplying alternative markets, deep human capital driven by a highly educated population, and a masterful law of adaptation that creates parallel industrial and financial systems in the dark. Yet survival is not the same as prosperity. For many ordinary Iranians, the cost of survival has been high. Economic hardship remains common, and a younger generation increasingly questions the system that governs them. This is the paradox of modern Iran, a state remarkably resilient against external pressure, yet still challenged by tensions from within. For decades, many believed that enough economic pressure would eventually force Iran to surrender. That prediction never came true. Instead, Iran adapted. It learned how to survive in a world designed to isolate it. Iran may not be the richest nation. It may not be the most powerful. But after decades of sanctions, war, and isolation, it remains standing. And perhaps that is the most remarkable part of the story. Because the mystery of Iran is not how it became powerful. The mystery is why it never collapsed. What do you think about Iran's survival strategy? Can they sustain this parallel economic and military system indefinitely? Or will the simmering social pressures from within eventually fracture this fortress? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this comprehensive geopolitical deep dive valuable, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming analyses. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.